So on flight day 10, Orion entered the distant retrograde orbit. While it was there, one of the things that the mission for Artemis 1, not only is it pushing the capability of this spacecraft and system that's going to send humans the next, all the times after this, one of the things it was also designed specifically to do was to push the boundaries of how far a human-rated spacecraft has gone before. On day 11, Orion surpassed the Apollo 13 record, the distance that they took as they made that adjusted orbit to give themselves more time. The oxygen tank on board Apollo 13 burst, which made it impossible for them to land on the moon and also save the crew. So they had to put themselves into an orbit that allowed them to figure things out while they were on the way there. And for Apollo 13, the farthest that they got was 248,655 miles from Earth. And on flight day 11, Orion passed that Apollo 13 record. And then for the next few days, Orion actually ended up going to the max distance, ironically, on flight day 13, although I would probably wager that was planned. The Orion capsule reached 268,563 miles, almost 270,000 miles from Earth. And the scope of that is really crazy. This podcast is brought to you by Estes Rockets. We really appreciate the partnership we have here with Estes Rockets. We ran the Falcon 9 giveaway from the SpaceX rocket, the official SpaceX rocket. The winner is going to be receiving that Falcon 9 very shortly. It's on its way down the coast to them, which is awesome. But if you're looking to get a rocket for yourself, or anyone else in your life, especially if you have a young one and you're trying to get them into something cool, or maybe they have an interest in science, Estes Rockets is a great place to have something where you can bond and enjoy the joys of rocket science in your own backyard or wherever you live where you're able to launch rockets. So if you are looking to get that, right now Estes is running their 12 days of Estes. I think they're on day 7 right now, where they're having sales each day on specific things in the store. But always, you can use our code IN_Alex to get 10% off at EstesRockets.com. It's going to help you get rockets. It's not going to include sales, things like this, and it's not going to include engines, but it will include everything else in the store. So go into EstesRockets.com, use our code word IN_Alex, get 10% off things in the store, and maybe you're not looking for the Falcon 9 rocket. I mean, look, we have here, we picked this up a little while ago here. This is the commemorative edition of the Saturn V rocket, which obviously is coming in real handy as we're talking about this episode, the moon mission, Artemis 1. The Apollo program was obviously a big thing, and this one is actually the Apollo 11 commemorative edition, which is really cool. But IN_Alex, get 10% off at Estes Rockets, and get something good for yourself or someone that you love for the holidays. And that's it, folks. Thank you, Estes Rockets, for your support and for sponsoring the podcast. Let's get back to the show. And one of the things that's really important about what's different about what we've been doing for decades, which is low Earth orbit for the International Space Station, there are lots of things that can happen, and it's certainly not that safe to be in low Earth orbit, although it is safer than the moon. Going to the moon requires a whole nother safety margin to protect the astronauts from the harshness that's outside of our influence of planet Earth. One of those things is radiation, highly energized particles. We'll talk about one of the payloads that's on board that helps with that. But going outside the Van Allen belt is a big deal, that belt of radiation, and you have to make sure that the mission is actually capable of protecting the astronauts. And so that's one of the things that it's doing here. Aside from defending yourself from the elements, on day 12 of the flight, they tested the star trackers and the reaction control thrusters, which are there to help adjust the spacecraft as it's moving to make sure that it's on point. Again, you're basically threading a needle the entire time, and having those thrusters and extra fuel on board is super important to make sure that you can make an adjustment when the slightest thing could be off. So a lot of that is thanks to the European Space Agency's service module that has performed tremendously well. And in space, it's great to have these thrusters and know where to go and to try and thread the needle, but once you're in space and you lose track of exactly where you are because of the giant scale of everything, having star trackers on board to actually view the starscape that's out there, because it's so infinite and so far out there, they almost become static things that you can address yourself to and figure out where you are. I'll tell a quick story real quick. In college, one of the classes that was arguably one of the most difficult and definitely the most dry was, like my throat right now, was guidance, navigation, and control, which arguably is one of the most important things to make sure that you have down and you're not guessing. Guidance, navigation, and control is super important because you need to know where you are, and only once you know where you are can you make those moves. It's not like here on Earth where you're driving a car, you get lost, and you're like, I'll just find a gas station and we'll pull over and I'll get more gas. There is no gas station in space right now. There are some companies working on it for satellites in orbit, but that's not something you can get more of in space unless you send something like nuclear energy or nuclear pellets or some kind of energy to have a very large amount of thrust and propulsion to use. So knowing where you are is super important so that you can make very strategic and focused moves so that you can make the most of your time up there and not waste fuel. The more fuel you have as your margin, as we'll talk about later, it's all the better. And one thing I'll note, NASA's done a great job of sharing the progress of the Artemis mission, and each of these has a blog that is accompanied to it. They've even had a series, a podcast, I believe, where they've actually been going deeper into the mission, and there's obviously been media briefings and plenty of content out there for the Artemis mission. But if you want to check out each of these days and dive into them, what we're trying to do here is give you a bite-sized Artemis mission recap. The last mission we went launch to entering lunar orbit, and here we're talking about the entire time in lunar orbit. You can check out all of those blog posts on each day, and those are available in the episode's link, whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever else you listen to your podcast, or watching us here on YouTube. All of those links will be there if you want to check those out.